The Catholic Morning Show on Iowa Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to Iowa Catholic Radio. It's 15 minutes after the hour, and we are grateful you are making the Catholic Morning Show a part of your day. I'm your host, Bo Bonner. Elise has got the news covered, Aiden checking the weather and the boards, and Deacon Tony has us praying our prayers. On the second half of the show, we will have Catholic artist Daniel Mitsui on. He is, he meticulously details ink drawings entirely on hand by paper and vellum. He desires to make art that is faithful to tradition, yet strikingly original and vigorously medieval in spirit. I have his work firsthand. I can tell you who does so. You will want to stick around to talk with him. But right now, let's turn to Holly Taylor Coolman, assistant professor of theology at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. Her book, Parenting, the Complex and Beautiful Vocation of Raising Children, is what we're going to talk about today. Holly, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
We're doing better because it got all the way to 6 degrees this morning, so that's been warm for us. So we're pretty happy.
We're in a little bit of shock here too on the East Coast. We've been in the single digits as well, so we need to all just build a fire and wait for spring, I think.
That's right. Well, and speaking of parenting, I realize now after 5 children that we've always should have bought multiple pairs of gloves because they will inevitably go somewhere else. So speaking of parenting and doing things like rounding up kids' gloves, Holly, I think the best way to start this out is what makes someone decide, I'm going to write a parenting book?
Right. Does the world really need another parenting book? Well, Bo, for me, it comes out of my own life over years and really decades at this point. So for me, the biggest part of my work in life for almost 30 years now has been 2 things. Raising 5 kids. My husband and I have 5 children, all of whom came to us by adoption, and also teaching and reading and thinking about theology. And so I just came to see more and more ways that those 2 things were coming together for me. And even more practically speaking, as my own kids got a little older, I found that younger parents were sometimes coming to me to say, hey, can we talk for a minute? That's usually how those kinds of conversations begin. And talk about a lot of different situations with them, a lot of different challenges. But I realized that after all those years, I had some thoughts. Certain themes came up over and over again, and that is really the genesis of this book.
Well, we had a chance on The Uncommon Good, Bud and I, to talk to you, and I realize it's been months, if not a little longer than that. In relooking at the book, getting ready for this interview to talk to you again, one of the things I wanted to vouch for it the most is I realized there was different themes I picked up on this time that I really wanted to expound on. And so to the listeners out there, it's this sort of book. It's not a book that I think, you can, of course, read it fast, read it straight through. Holly writes it beautifully. But there really are seasons, as it were, of themes that you'll come back to again and again. For instance, I think I've been stealing your point about map making and forgetting to attribute it to you. I know there's other people who talk about map making in life and ethics, but particularly that chapter, I think sometimes that's exactly those parents that you said that come up to you, they want to talk to you for a minute. If there's a way to talk about laying out the map of parenting and how parenting lays out maps for children, that alone is just one image among many that I think can really stick with parents who approach this book.
Yeah, I hope it can. I do think that this book is a little bit different than maybe your typical parenting book. I have a friend who says, what you've really written is a kind of anti-parenting book. And what he means by that is that, a lot of parenting books come in with some kind of a strong formula, strong solution. Here's how you can get your child to stay in bed. Here's how you can guarantee that all your teenagers will be going to Mass with you cheerfully or whatever it is. And this book is really different than that. It's meant to sort of come up alongside people. I say to people, there's absolutely no finger shaking in this book. It's really meant to say, in a big way, boy, isn't this complicated and hard? It's kind of the subtitle of the book. It's complicated, but isn't it also just great in those moments where we see the possibilities that we have as parents and some of the rewards really for us. And so the map making image, I think, fits into that that way of thinking about it. It's definitely intended to be something that you might read when your child is 3 and think about it in a certain way, and then come back to the image again when your child's 12 and find yourself thinking about it in a very different way. And I'll be honest, it is sort of a book that I hope that readers who turn to the book have kind of sitting on their bookshelf. They can sort of pull it out again when things seem challenging.
Well, I think so. Map making an apprenticeship you put together. What I've puzzled about lately is to think the apprenticeship that your children have with you, right? Like you've been at life at it a little longer than they have, and they imitate you. But in some ways, what they're imitating is you being an apprentice, right? This is, you start being a parent when you're a parent. It's not like you get a few practice runs. And even if you have multiple children, I know the joke is you practice on the first ones, but you only can ever parent the 5th child the first time as the 5th child, right? So the idea of apprenticeship and handing on and learning as you're teaching, I think that's something not only that suffuses your book, but something that parents, maybe they beat themselves up about. They're like, oh, why don't I know more? Or why wasn't I prepared? But you do such a great job of saying, this is sort of the essence of being a parent, is you teach by, as it were, learning well in front of young minds that really pick up on the fact of you learning well as you go.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And maybe that is one of the ways in which you're kind of hearing in this book from me as somebody who has done a lot of study and a lot of teaching, that I'm very much aware of the richness of that process and, the ongoing nature of that process. For me, the apprenticeship way of thinking, so, just to say it briefly, I sort of suggest that parents are something like, a master at work in some craft, and then their children come alongside and they sort of watch and they sort of are assigned some tasks, and slowly they move into accomplishing their own craft. And for me, that is a real alternative to some of the possibilities that I think actually come to dominate more. We're managing our children, we're instructing our children, we're trying to shape them, we're trying to mold them. There are ways in which parents do those things. But for me, those models of you are doing something to your child and fixing them or making them what they should be, honestly just have their limits. They work in certain ways, but they have their limits. And I am trying to offer something a little broader and more long-term than that.
You had me at, let's not act like we're managing our children. There's a big question about should we manage any humans that we could get into a bigger philosophical debate, but certainly with our kids. And I think you show this with chapters that you have, like parenting in survival mode, busy days, ways that people are asking when you're thinking about parenting, okay, it's good to be theological about it, but what about the nitty-gritty and when things are difficult? And the honesty that you show in those chapters, I think, hopefully, is part of the encouragement. Sometimes as a parent, you might think, oh, I'm the only one who's ever ran into these problems. And one of the nice things about human history is probably these problems have shown up multiple times before. But as you said, because you're not trying to problem solve or, as it were, hack parenting, right? Figure out the easiest way to do it. I hope that that's another way that if people get a chance to read this book, they find that threaded throughout.
I hope that's right. I think actually you have just kind of put your finger on it. If there is one thing that really runs through the whole book, it is to say, we are in this together. And so one of the things we need to do together is talk about it together, and along with, honestly, some other practical ways of being together, praying together, bringing that casserole that's needed in the emergency, et cetera, et cetera. Let's not go this alone. That's chapter 3, fostering community within and around, and then you sort of put this back through when you talk about schools and other way of learning, and even talking about later adolescence, parenting as an adult. The communal element, because in some ways people go, oh, I thought you said this was
motivated by theology. What I hear a lot so far is practical things, but the theology of we are doing this together and that God has set us in communities providentially. I think that is the backdrop where you say, if you attend to that in parenting, you are parenting in a theological way.
That's exactly right. It comes out of my own conception of theology, which does involve some pretty esoteric topics, relationships between the persons of the Trinity, and some of those are foundational ways of thinking. But theology always also extends into practical matters, the family. How do we think about the culture in our living together, what ethical decisions that we make? So I already assume that theology includes both very theoretical tasks and then also some pretty concrete practical tasks. And that's what I mean when I talk about it grounding this book.
Well, we're getting to the end of the segment here. If there's one other thing that you would want to note, to say, as you said, that this is cast in a different key probably than most people are thinking of parenting books, what would be one more thing you would want to make sure people know about the book, hopefully to prompt them to go out and get it?
Yeah, I think maybe extending out from what you and I have already talked about, one thing that I say about this apprenticeship model is this. If your child is sort of watching you and learning alongside you, then of course there is a certain way in which attending to your own, as you suggested, attending to your own ongoing learning, even attending to your own well-being, is very much a part of that process. And early on in the book, I say this. The subtitle talks about the vocation of parenting. And I just encourage any parents who read the book, any parents listening right now, to recall that if you are engaged in a vocation, what that means is that you yourself have been called. And we're only called if somebody is doing the calling. So I actually think that there is a really important way in which the first task of parenting is to reroot ourselves in that relationship with the one who is calling us, who begins by surrounding us with love and with mercy and forgiveness even when we don't see it, and who continues to guide us in wise ways. And then step forward and start to do the work that we are called to do in imitation of that.
Absolutely. Beautiful way to wrap this up. The book is Parenting, the Complex and Beautiful Vocation of Raising Children, written by Holly Taylor Coolman, who was our guest today. Holly, thank you for coming on the morning show.
Thank you so much. Great to talk with you.
The Catholic Morning Show is a production of the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. To hear this and other programs, visit iowacatholicradio.com or download the Iowa Catholic Radio app.